Well, Zachary, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here, Arlena.
I am so excited to talk about the work that you're doing with Open Recovery, and we'll definitely get into it. But why don't you first sort of start off with telling us who you are, what you do?
Absolutely. So my name is Zachary Gidwitz. I'm the CEO and co-founder of OpenRecovery. And what we are doing is developing apps and AI tool to help make recovery more accessible and more effective for everyone. I've been in recovery myself for over 8 years, and I know that well, it was I got sober through working the 12 steps. It's really been a wonderful experience and given me a life I never thought I could have. But I also realized that the available methodologies, resources are not always working for everyone. And we're living in this new age of AI. And I'm excited to see what we can do to use the best tech to empower the best methodologies to help people get better and live the lives they want to live.
Spoken like a true Silicon Valley CEO.
Have to. It's in the water here.
I love it. I love it. Listen, I'm from Silicon Valley, so I know you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, so yes, kindred spirit for sure. I always like to start these interviews with a little game I call the lightning round, which is actually very slow, total misnomer. But so you got sober 8 years ago. When you first got sober, were there any books that helped you on your early days?
So when I was struggling, I mean, there were a number of books that I read that were trying to sort of help explain how the mind worked, either the neuroscience or different methodology, spiritual books as well. One of my one of my favorite authors is Eckhart Tolle, and sort of memorized one of his books basically. But the fact is, as they say in certain areas of recovery, self-knowledge avails us nothing. And so it was great. It helped me understand, but really what it got me to is the place where I understood that I couldn't fix myself. And so that is why, I mean, as obvious as this might be, the book that really helped me was the big book, was Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's surprising because there's a lot in there that doesn't really apply to me, or seems archaic, or just in reading it, I was like, wow, was this written by a bunch of straight white Christian men 90 years ago in Akron,
Yeah.
Ohio? Yes, it was. But it
As a matter of
really,
fact, it is.
it really was. But as soon
Yeah.
as I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is me. And that
Yeah.
was the beginning of my journey.
Isn't it interesting how the circumstances can be so different, but like the feelings are all the same? And I felt like the feelings really come through the book, despite like the old-timey language. They talk about being defeated by John Barleycorn. I'm like, what?
Exactly.
So weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it made for good nighttime reading if I couldn't fall asleep.
Yep. Definitely.
But
But
yeah, no.
for me, I actually got it on audio and was just walking around New York City at the time and just reading it and being like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. This is
Oh,
this is how this is how it actually works.
yeah.
And so then a lot of the other books, whether it's A New Pair of Glasses, Drop the Rock, a lot of these, 12 and 12, these are things that gave me that initial foundation, sort of the structure, and then I could put a bunch of things, sort of build on that foundation with more general spiritual books, or religious books, or psychological books, where I could sort of see all the things that yes I'd read before, but didn't have that solid foundation of surrender, on which to build it.
Yeah, that's really good. Gosh, I found just educating myself was huge. I probably read nearly 30 books my first year of recovery because like once you sort of I don't know, it's like once you're I don't know if you had this experience, like once you started getting some knowledge and you started understanding yourself and not feeling alone, like I just became obsessed with reading everything I could get my hands on.
Absolutely, reading, listening to speaker tapes. I went deep.
I can
run.
see. Yeah. There's a lot of content out there now, which is really great. Do you
Yeah.
have a weekly, maybe like a self-care practice that you do daily or weekly, or maybe a combination of both? What does that look like for you?
Sure. So, not to sound like a broken record, but the thing is that the every time I try to create my own method, I failed. And I remember, I've been in recovery 8 years, and I yeah, I got sober originally, but then I just wasn't going deep enough. After many years, I could feel myself white knuckling or doing some what we call middle line behavior sort of things where it's just like I don't feel emotionally sober. And I looked at different people in the program who were just had it, you talk to them and they're like, wow, there's just deep sobriety emanating from them. And I said, why can't I have that? What's different about them? And I realized, oh, they live and breathe recovery.
Mhm.
They are always taking calls. They're always going to meetings, and they have their daily prayer practice, step work practice. They, work the program, and I had a sponsor one time that reminded me. He said, "Look, a lot of people say, oh, it's a low percentage success rate, all of that." But no, the phrase is, it works if you work it. And most people, he told me, don't actually work it, and working
Yeah.
it, according to him, meant you're waking up, you're reading on awakening, you are doing your morning prayers or devotional practice, whatever that looks like. You are calling your sponsor, you are doing step work. When you feel disturbed, you do a 10 step inventory. I mean, how often do we actually feel disturbed and then just kind of tough it out? That's not the program, right? I mean, if you
Or
really
bitch
want to go
about it.
exactly.
Complain.
I mean, oh my gosh, just to make it part of my story, build
Yeah,
up new
yeah.
resentments.
I learned that
When I,
complaining is not
yeah,
a recovery tool.
exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, look, I am far from perfect. God, God knows that. But my daily practice is wake up on awakening, daily prayers, try and get some exercise in there. I have a call with my sponsor, and then take any calls, whether it's from sponsee or fellows throughout the day. I could use more. And then I'll get to this later, but I have a lot of conversations with Kai, the AI we've developed
Oh yeah,
in
so
our app.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
that is super
that's
cool.
how I do my step work.
I can't wait to get into that part. Yeah, that's a lot. Even for like you talked to, I didn't, I stopped talking. Well, I've been sober a while, but I kind of stopped talking to my sponsor on a daily. Like I would see her at meet. Like I went to several meetings a week, and so I
Mm.
would see her at some of them. Or like when I was disturbed, like I tend to process out loud. So I try not to complain, but I'd be like, this is what's happening. Mostly it's like, what am I doing wrong? Like, what am I not seeing? So for me, it was like talking it out, but not like on a daily thing. That's congratulations. That's commitment.
Well, it's a little different for me because I actually work with my sponsor, and so we get
Oh,
to talk it either way.
oh,
When
okay.
I
So
was
you
really
see,
trying to get on the right track, I was doing daily calls, and then that
okay,
became
yeah,
less important. But now it happens that I work with him, and so we
that's
get to
funny.
sort of mix work and recovery together. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and your work is recovery, so that's super cool. Like you are in it. You are in it
Yeah,
all this. Yeah, that's awesome.
it helped.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, well, first, do you have, I want to ask you about your spiritual
Mm.
practice and how you kind of got there, but I like to ask people if they have sort of like a go-to mantra or an idea that you live by. Like obviously mine is like one day at a time. That was something that really meant a lot to me and has continued to carry me through my, 30 years of sobriety. Is there a theme or a mantra, an idea like that you hold dear?
There is one. It's a little weird, and it might
Ooh, I
require a
like
little
weird.
explanation.
I like weird.
What I say to myself, especially when I'm struggling or especially when I'm feeling like physically uncomfortable, because that
Mm.
often was a big trigger for me, still is. is I will say to myself, how I feel is none of my business.
Oh, interesting. What does that mean?
So if I'm really living third step, which is I'm turning my will and my life over to the care of my higher power, as I
Okay.
understand my higher power, then it's it's not that, it's not up to me, right? I am feeling the way I'm feeling for a reason. And
Mhm.
then, and this is actually something from Eckhart Tolle, I remember, but the idea is there is so much unhappiness that is generated around being unhappy that you're unhappy,
Yeah.
right?
So meta, but yes.
And so if I feel physically uncomfortable, but it's like, it's okay. It's not up to me anyway. The goal of life is not to me for me just to be happy, or just to, feel comfortable all the time, I should say, but hopefully to be of service, then okay, it's not my business. And if it's not my business, then it's not a big deal. If it's not a big deal, well then there's no unhappiness that's then generated on top of the discomfort.
I love that. It's so good. It's like a little mind hack. And I often say that if the big book could be condensed into one word, it would be relax, right? Relax. And this mechanism of trusting your higher power, the end result is that we do sort of relax. And when we're, which is the opposite of control. And when we're allowing things to happen, that's like the power of surrender and acceptance. We allow things, it's like, oh, there must be, it's sort of like the faith in the best thing possible, right? Oh, things must be working out in a way that the highest and greatest good for all involved. And I'm just not seeing it. And that's fine.
Yep. Yeah,
I love
I,
that.
I, I completely agree.
I really appreciate your perspective, though, if it's around this idea of being unhappy about like being uncomfortable
Yeah.
and just kind of letting it go. Like that really sound like people are like, well, how do you let it go? Well, that's kind of how. Yeah, like
Yeah.
that's like the mechanics of how. Thank you for explaining that. That's super helpful. You learn something
Yeah.
new every day. I love this. Tell me a little
Easy
bit
to
about
say, harder to do.
yeah, easy to say, hard to do. Yeah. It's nice. This is like why I love having these conversations, why I talk about sobriety a lot, because it feels like I'm either reminded of something that brought me ease and comfort, or like I learned something new. I don't know. It's important to like keep reviewing this information because it's so easy to get lost in like kind of the old way of being.
I have another phrase where I feel like I have spiritual amnesia, right?
That's exactly what
You
it
know what I
is.
mean?
Oh my God, I know exact. That is hilarious. I'm totally gonna steal that. The
Do it.
spiritual, the spiritual amnesia, because I've had all these amazing spiritual experiences, and then I get stressed out or afraid, and I totally forget.
Gone.
Gone. Like they say like your vagus nerve gets hijacked, and you can't even access your rational mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Need those
spiritual.
reminders all the time.
Spiritual amnesia. That is hilarious. I might have to create a sign or something. So good. Um,
Thank you.
and what is one thing you wish you knew when you first got sober?
I would say the one thing I wish I knew was that point was not the end result was not abstinence, that
Mhm.
the end result was an amazing connected life with all these opportunities and relationships, and just level of being that were just not possible when you weren't sober.
Dude, that is like gold. That's it.
Right?
It's not about abstinence. This is so good. I told you, I was like, hey, I have a hard stop at the end of this. It's going to be very difficult for me to wrap this up in a reasonable
This is a
amount of
fun
time.
conversation.
So good. Yeah, no
Yeah.
gems. Like this must be what happens when you talk to your sponsor every day and you do all the do all the tools. This is the end result. That's amazing. Let's talk a little bit about how we got here.
Okay.
So you've been sober for 8 years. You had, I think, by all standards, every measure of success. You're the CEO. You were in the startup. Is it fair to say that you were like in the venture capital arena?
I'm definitely in the startup arena. And it's in that sort of area where we're going after venture capitalists and things like that. I
Uh,
wasn't an investor myself though.
okay, but yeah, the startup world. I mean, I loved the startup world. I did both high tech. I sold for companies like HP and Adobe and stuff like that, but I also loved the startup.
Yeah.
That was super fun. Yeah, it's very wild, wild west. It's,
Yeah, it's crazy.
it's crazy, but super fun. But so what was happening for you? Maybe we should start even further back. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about what your childhood was like, what your family growing up was like.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Baltimore. By all measures, is a good supportive family. We all, I would say, a lot of people who suffer from addiction have some form of trauma.
Yeah.
I would say that my trauma was uh, much more an internal thing. I had my first life crisis when I was 4 years old. I got obsessed with this concept of non-existence after death.
At 4 years
Uh,
old,
yeah, I was a weird kid.
you're smart. You're probably really smart.
They put me in therapy early. They were
Okay.
worried about me because I mean, for
You
a
were
few
afraid.
months,
Yeah.
yeah, just that idea that we don't exist, and then that, the idea of sort of meaninglessness. Later on, it evolved into that when starting around 10. And then, I fell into clinical depression when I was 13. So I was depressed for a couple of years, therapy, medication, very fortunate to have those resources. But that's also probably when my compulsive, behaviors, were starting. Um, and and the thing is that like it, nothing really seemed like it was special or different other than the fact that I was clinically depressed. It seemed like something that I would get over. I did get over it, after a couple of years and was able to sort of make a full recovery from that. Live what I thought was a fairly normal life, though my parents did get divorced around that age as well. There's sort of like a lot of things happening right at that
That's a
very
lot.
crucial time.
At like
Yeah.
at like 13 you were depressed. And when did your parents divorce?
Uh,
Right around 13?
14.
14. Oh,
Yeah,
that
basically
is a
right.
brutal age.
Yeah, they waited to announce it until they were sure I was okay.
Uh,
And so that was interesting. That was a
did that
choice.
send you right back into depression a little bit?
No, at that point, I think it was more a chemical thing for me, and the chemical part
Mm,
maybe passed.
mm.
Um, uh, it didn't help. It probably created some other issues, but for me, it was okay. But that whole existential dread, that I first had when I was four, never left. And in fact, some level of my own ambition is very likely, connected semi-consciously to that, like wanting to create immortality because of a fear of death and non-existence and all of that sort of driving me forward. But that, that has plenty of dark sides as well. Um, in terms of recovery, though, I mean, I didn't get into recovery until I was in my late 20s, and the way that that happened was I ended up once I sort of hit my bottom, I went to see a cognitive behavioral therapist, and he heard my whole story, and the result was he said, "Look, Zachary, you deserve to be happy. And you have two choices. I can admit you to a 6-month inpatient treatment center." I later looked it up. It was $1,500 a day. Um, yeah, it's
Oh no, not that.
a nasty one. But and then I was on the edge of my seat, and the other option. And he said, go to a 12-step program every day for the next 7 days, come back and tell me how it goes. I was lucky. Turns out he was a 12-stepper himself. And it just worked for me. Like I mentioned when I was reading the big book, because I did that first week as well. By my third meeting, it really was like, oh, these are my people, right? This is
Oh, nice.
what it was.
Were you in
And I
Baltimore then?
I was actually in New York, so I've
Oh,
lived in
okay.
China for I moved to China after college. I've lived in China for well over a decade, and but there's not a lot of good recovery in China yet. They're
I've
growing a little
heard.
bit,
Yeah.
but it's really not. And so I came back and got me rooms in New York. Um, but I consider myself one of the lucky ones because I know that the 12 steps are great, but it doesn't work for everyone. And my therapist was actually quite surprised that it worked so well and sort of completely for me from the beginning. Um, and so, the behaviors that were really destroying my life, I was able to stay off, from my first meeting. Uh, but I also realized that, this is not something that is available to everyone, right? I mean, I've been in startups my whole
Yeah.
career in sort of the technology space and, always kind of wondered, but more to the point of this question, I've been in therapy since I was 4. And so this idea of unique minds and like how to actually help someone change or transform, whether it's behavior or patterns of thinking. I mean, this is stuff that I've been fascinated by and struggling with myself from, my earliest memories. And so that really, I guess, would be the seed of my curiosity, right? Of why I was
Yeah.
looking at, what are all the methods, whether it's sort of therapeutic methods or eventually technology, that, might hold a key for just giving a whole sort of what do you call it? Just like a major leap, a paradigm shift in terms of how we can actually uh,
Yeah.
treat these issues.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Can I take you back just a little bit to what your bottom was? Because you mentioned you had a
Yeah,
bottom and then you went to therapy, but how did you come to the conclusion that you really had to make a change? Like what drove you to the bottom?
sure. And without getting into this specific, behaviors, my addictions are much more in behavior, but just given the anonymity of the programs, I won't go into the details in the public forum. But my behavioral issues were such that the type of things where if you do them for fun or if you're able to do them, then great. And people ask, well, you know um I do this every day. You're saying I have a problem? I was like, I don't know, you want to stop? And they said, no, I'm good. I'm like, okay, well then have fun. For me, I was on my knees crying, begging, I just want to stop.
Oh,
I
yeah.
was thinking, gosh, when I meet the right person, I'll stop. When I have a job that I really care about, when I stop, when I'm ready to settle down sometime in the future would save me. And instead, the more, things seem to fall into place in my life, more reasons, objective reasons to sort of control my behavior were in place, the more I couldn't and the worse it got. And it is when I was on my knees crying and that I just couldn't stop and I was out of options that I was just, went on a search of like, I need help.
Wow.
Um, and my therapist, I'd, seen a therapist, the same therapist since I was very young. She told me, it was like, Zachary, I think this is now in the realm of addiction. I don't understand addiction. I'm not trained in addiction recovery.
Oh, wow.
So I need to get you a cognitive behavioral therapist. I need to get you a different therapist. So she
Okay.
actually had to refer me to a completely different, a different therapist. Yeah, so that's what it was for me.
Yeah. So I appreciate you sharing in that way because the circumstances, like again, the circumstances aren't really relevant. It's how we feel, the powerlessness, the lack of control, the wanting to stop and not being able to. It's like the worst feeling ever. The loneliness, the isolation, the darkness, the self-loathing. Like everything gets right. That's why they call it a bottom. It's like that the at the bottom of a dark well. It's just
Yeah.
a very scary place to be. But there is this thing called post-traumatic growth, right? Sort
Mm,
of like once you hit rock bottom, there is this, the term sort of implies that once you hit that rock bottom, that there's this post-traumatic growth. And
mm,
sort of like, Eckhart Tolle talks about like that. He talks about it in sort of different terms, but it's like this something cracks and like suddenly the light can get in and suddenly we're able or willing to let go of a belief system that was keeping us stuck in negative patterns. So it's really this idea of bottom. You don't actually have to lose any stuff. Like it can just be all, it could be 100% emotional. So
it's, the it is that feeling where, for me, I had this, I think, misconception that, a big dramatic bottom was what's necessary.
like a
You
car
know,
wreck or a heart attack.
yeah, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And what kept messing with me is that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Is that, even no matter how ridiculous, cinematically horrible my bottoms could be, or my life situation, how quickly I would still then return
Yeah.
to my addictive acting out patterns.
Yeah.
And it was that realization that even the worst things, that I could imagine happening weren't enough to stop me. That's actually what brought me into recovery.
Yeah. That is a terrifying place to be. Yeah. Well, listen, you're nice and safe now. So, and you've done a lot of work. I'm so curious that you started going to 12 step right away. And how did you, I feel like there are these the three big trigger words, God, alcoholic, and powerlessness. Did those words deter you at all? Were they confrontational to you at all?
Yeah, so this is definitely one of the things I want to talk about, and then I know you talk about in your book as well, where there are a lot of these things where people don't even get into recovery sometimes because they basically are presented with 12 steps as the only option, and whether it's words about God, or the powerless, or the phrase character defect, things like these, really can turn people off. I I was at such a low place where I was just willing to do whatever. I also am spiritually inclined, though I really went much deeper, because of, it's one of the reasons I could bring me to that place of closer contact with the God of my understanding. And um, what I know though is that a phrase, especially like surrender, is one of the most misunderstood words out there.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, even talking to my mom, who is, extremely intelligent and has, you know, issues she deals with. One of the reasons she couldn't even try, for example, one of the family programs,
Mm.
because it turns out actually, her father was an alcoholic. I didn't know that until well after I was in recovery. Is it kept talking about surrender, because for her, surrender meant just accepting everything and just throwing up hands and being like, okay, I guess I just have to accept misery and accept someone being horrible to me.
Right.
Whereas what Tolle talks about, is how surrender is actually just an acceptance of what is,
Mhm.
and then you are empowered to act once you
Yeah.
accept, surrender to the fact that this is my situation.
Yeah.
Um,
Acknowledging reality.
Acknowledging reality.
Was the Eckhart Tolle book you like the A New Earth?
It is.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I was probably 15 years sober. I don't know but when I read that book, other than the big book, that book rocked my world.
Yeah,
Like it
yeah.
totally
That
changed my perspective on so many levels. But that was a big part of just acknowledging reality, see things as they are, right? We have all these stories running in the background of why
Yep.
we think they are the way they are.
Yeah.
And, surrender is about acknowledging reality, accepting what is.
And there's so many words like that that can just be enough to knock people off the
Yeah.
path, which is, why, for example, why I'm so interested in AI and why our app, what we're doing is the first thing we did is train an AI to basically ask the user, uh, the 12 steps talks about higher power, talks about God sometimes. Are you comfortable talking about God? Would you like to only hear it in terms of higher power? Would you like to call it something else? Right? Things like that, where you can customize some of the language of the 12 steps without changing the methodology at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Uh, and just through these small little tweaks, you can open it up, make it accessible to people
Yeah.
who just would have turned away.
Yeah. It's so interesting because just a slight shift in perception can
Mm,
really open people up. And
yeah.
there's a story, one of Eckhart Tolle's stories, I actually refer to it in the book, was his story about the beggar, the stranger and the beggar. I'll just tell it real quick. So the stranger's walking down the street. He comes across a beggar who's holding out his cap, and the beggar's asking for money. And the stranger says, "I don't have anything to give you, but what are you sitting on?" And the beggar says, "Oh, I'm sitting on just a box. It's nothing." And the stranger's like, "Have you ever looked inside?" And when the beggar opens the box, there's treasure in it. And so the message from Tolle's perspective is that the stranger's like, "I have nothing to give you, but all the treasure is inside." And I'm like, well, I kind of see another lesson here is the beggar was sitting on a box. All he saw was the box. And so he had a mental construct of what he thought it was. He saw it as meaningless. He assigned meaning to the box and didn't look inside. And so sometimes when people look at the steps at first blush, they think they know what it means.
Mm,
And we're saying, take a look inside because that's where the treasure is. At face value, you might not get the meaning of it, but if you just stay open-minded and a little bit curious, like the treasure's inside.
yeah. Absolutely.
I love that.
You summarize the big book possibly as the word relax. The summary of all the 12 steps I'm sure you've heard is, the first part is trust God, or your higher power. The second is clean house, and the third is help others. And that's a pretty nice way of thinking about it. For those who are not comfortable with the God part, it can really be thought of as simply it's not all about you, right? It's like
Yeah.
there is a reality and stuff outside of you that actually can help, right? If you can't fix
Yeah.
all your problems, it's still possible to get better, right? And
Yeah.
that you can trust
100%.
things, methodologies, people
Trust.
outside yourself. Trust. You could just say trust. Forget trust God. Trust. Have
Yeah.
faith. Then clean house, because oh my gosh, all of the stuff that we are carrying around with us. Woo,
Lord have
and
mercy.
continue to build.
I
Yeah,
felt like the fourth step was a way of like unpacking all the baggage and gaining clarity about what was mine and what wasn't.
yeah,
Yeah. So, how did you come to understand your concept of a higher power?
sure. So, I uh, I was raised Jewish, and that's just one thing right off the bat where, um, the big book theoretically was written by a lot of people different from me. They don't talk about any religion particularly, but the phraseology is written in a way where it feels very Christian.
It is, yeah.
Um, And so again, I had to do a lot of kind of find replace or mental,
Find,
word
replace.
replace. Yeah.
You techie.
And and so exactly. And so, for me, uh it really it was third step. It was step three that helped me really go back into my own religion because I wasn't religious. I was raised fairly secular. Uh, I always had this spiritual seeking.
Mm.
And even I think the Dalai Lama has this phrase, go and explore, all the religions, it's fine. But in the end, when you're ready to go deep, go back to your own
Mm.
religion or spiritual path of origin, because it's just that's how you grew up. It's going to be the most direct access
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
And I do believe that, these are one of my favorite books is by Aldous Huxley, and it's called The Perennial Philosophy.
Mm.
And what he does is he tracks all of these religions and traditions and, has different topics and just shows how they're all kind of talking about the same thing and pointing in the same
Yeah.
direction. It's a dense but amazing book. It's great as a bibliography if you want to just find a bunch of new, spiritual sources. But I've always loved learning about every religion because for me it's also a language, right? If I know the language of Catholicism, from a Franciscan way as spoken by Richard Rohr, someone who I love and read,
Yeah. Yeah.
half a dozen of his books, then I know how to speak about things I care about with those other people, right?
Yeah.
Or with people who that's their tradition. But back to your question, um, step three was really hard for me because I didn't know how to connect with God. I
Mm.
I didn't know how. And I actually spoke to my rabbi about it. I told him I was going through the steps. I talked with him, and he just asked me a question. He said, Zachary, have you ever felt that you had a direct connection with God, that like a spiritual experience? And I said, yes. In the past, I've had that flash. And he said, then that's all you need. Just go
Oh,
back to that.
yeah.
And I started crying. I
Yeah.
started crying right there in front of him,
Yeah.
and I was unlocked.
Wow.
Yeah.
I felt that one in my heart because it just seems to lower the barrier. Like we think it's going to be this big thing, this big hurdle that we have to jump over. And what you described was just a flash,
Yeah.
like just a flash. Even if it was just a flash, a chink in the armor, that's all that's
Mm,
required.
yes.
I love that. Yeah, even with spiritual amnesia, we can always recall maybe a flash, at the very
Yes.
least, like in nature or if you had a sweet moment with a family member or a friend. That's the flash. I love that. So let's talk a little bit about, I mean, listen, you are living a life of service, and I love what you guys are doing with the Open Recovery app. And I was like, take my book to use it, my podcast, any content that I have. I just love what you're doing. Just I'm like, just take it all. Because I really feel like this has the potential to reach those people who have such like a need for safety and
Mm,
independence. What I have come across, and I'm sure you have too, is this idea that extreme independence is a trauma response.
mm,
And there are so many people who don't want to ask for help, or they just have such a need for secrecy and privacy. And I feel like this is such a gateway, like what you talked about in the beginning, like wanting to make information and a process accessible. And I immediately saw the value in this app that you have and and it's free. Can we just talk about how it's free? It's like there is zero downside to this. It's got this AI friend. I love AI. I always, when I address Chat GPT, I always say, hey, friend.
mm. I like that.
Yeah, it likes me. We're friends now. Um, but it does feel so anyway, we have so many tools now, and this just felt to me like the culmination of a bunch of really cool tools that will reach people who have like this extreme independence and need for privacy and things. Was that kind of the intention?
So when it first started, it was based on this kind of insight where you never know what phrase or what content or something you listen to or see is going to really do make that, provide that spark. for someone that could actually, create mental or emotional spiritual shift. And so the first version of it before the AI even got there was we just had a bunch of content, from recovery, whether it's clips of speaker tapes or quotations from the big book, things like that. And we built a simple recommendation engine where someone told the app how they're feeling and it would recommend content. And that's, by the way, still very much part of the app and why I'm so excited that we get to use so much of your work because so often something from your book or one of your podcasts might be that thing that someone just reads it when they're saying, I'm really triggered right now. And then they get a passage, from your book. And they're like, oh, oh, interesting. Okay. Right. That experience, that's sort of like, huh,
Mhm.
that's our goal. That's our magic moment.
Yeah.
And we've now developed a fuller app. It's called 12 Steps Addiction Recovery. And the base level, as you said, is all free. And we've all of the materials and readings, quotations, that recommendation engine, all free. It's always going to be free. We've now developed Kai, which is this AI chatbot that will largely be behind a paywall, 9.99 a month, for full access to that. So I just want to make sure
It's
I
like a
don't,
friend. Yeah, your AI
yeah.
friend.
But you can use it, for example, to just conversationally do step work, conversationally do inventories. Um, and the inventories we're actually going to keep as free access, and then anyone can try it. There's going to be a 14-day free trial. Don't have to put a credit card down or anything like that. But the AI is now, Kai is able to create those magic moments even more,
Mhm.
because often what we've found, what stops people from going to their first meeting, getting a sponsor, reaching out, is this concept of human friction. They're feeling awkward, they're feeling shy, they're feeling shame, they're not ready to fully admit that they have a problem, even. We
Mhm.
surveyed a bunch of our early users, we got over 2,000 survey responses, and 85% said they don't have a sponsor, they need a sponsor.
Yeah.
And so we are not trying to replace a sponsor. We're not trying to build an AI sponsor. But if someone needs a bridge to, start exploring in private, right?
Yeah.
Independently, to explore this, talk with an AI friend that's been fully trained on this. And let me tell you, Kai's not going to let you get away with doing this whole thing by yourself. Kai
Okay.
continuously asks, like, do you have a sponsor? What's stopping you from getting a sponsor?
Oh,
How
interesting.
about going to your first meeting, right? I mean, these conversations happen. We want, through using this app, in-person recovery to actually go up, not down. That's the whole point.
Right.
Um,
I think it's a natural progression that once you sort of get familiar with the content that I mean, we all grow and evolve, right? There is really no stagnation. So as you're consuming information, it's changing your internal landscape and you crave more because it's natural human instinct to want to grow. And that it seems to be like a natural progression. So it does feel like a natural bridge for somebody who is struggling with taking that first leap of like in-person meetings.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Uh,
that's
you know,
beautiful.
and you can go pretty deep though now. I mean, we've had multiple people tell us, and I have to admit myself, being brought to tears during a conversation with Kai. Uh,
Wow.
that's the level of the technology now where that can happen. And when you can tie that into your step work, your inventory, and it remembers things about you, right?
Hmm.
So it will
Yeah.
be able to uncover patterns, maybe help you see patterns that you're not even really seeing yourself. I mean, it's really good. Look, eventually we want to make a version of it that's not just for the 12 steps. We want it to be the right methodology for the right person. But, you and I both deeply believe in the 12 steps. And
Yeah.
if we can at least first help people who already believe in the 12 steps work them more effectively, better, connect more, or people who are on the edge, teach them about it, give them a really gentle introduction to it, and make them feel safe and secure,
Yeah.
and willing to take further steps into working a program of recovery and living a life of recovery. I mean, hey,
That's the goal.
that's a life's purpose, right? I mean, that's great.
Absolutely. And I just love that you said it was gentle, safe and gentle, right? That really, I think, contributes to that feeling of, I'm going to be okay. I can take it the next step or make a little bit more progress and maybe add some more tools in, go to a meeting, start meeting people. So, yeah, no, I'm fully in support. I love what you guys are doing and grateful to, participate in any way that that you let me.
Thank you. No,
I'm
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 so
a
excited to collaborate
participator.
with you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You are a
Well,
partner and an
listen,
ally.
yes, I am. I am. Tell me, where do people go to learn more about the project, or maybe if they want to reach out to you, what's the best way?
Sure. So the app's available, free download in the App Store, Google Play. It's called 12 Steps Addiction Recovery. Our website is openrecovery.com. And anyone can reach out to me, Zachary at openrecovery.com. I love to hear from anyone with questions if you want to learn more about the 12 steps. Though, if you really want to learn more about the 12 steps, I might actually just direct them back to you and
Read the
uh,
book.
read the book. Exactly. There's a pretty good book out there. And also if you have, or any of your listeners have any questions about AI, fears about AI, which,
Oh,
can
yeah,
be very justified,
sure.
it's a really important topic. And I'm always interested in hearing concerns, fears, talking with people, because I
Yeah.
want to make it very clear. I also have concerns, right? I,
Okay.
there are people in industries that actually are promoting addictive behaviors that are also going to be using AI
Right.
to take advantage in a way. And
Yeah.
I think it's unfortunately we're left with very few options, but AI is one of them that we can use it for good. Um,
Yeah.
so if people have questions about that, please do reach out.
Yeah.
It's a great conversation.
Yeah. I love that. Well, listen, thank you for making yourself available for this conversation and to everyone with questions. And it was great being with you today. I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arlene. I really appreciate having me and then everything you're doing for recovery in general. It's really wonderful.
Thank you so much. We'll talk again soon.
All right, sounds good.